Toca dar la bienvenida a esta sesión de la emisión número 35 de la FIL Guadalajara. Y hoy, por segunda ocasión en mi vida, me toca la enorme suerte de compartir pues, espacio con mi escritor favorito, uno de los escritores que han inspirado seriamente mucho de lo que he leído, de lo que he escrito, y no me imaginé por segunda ocasión, Paul Auster, poder presentar un libro suyo. Me da mucho gusto que pueda venir de nuevo a este espacio, Paul.
Hello, it's very nice to be with you again.
Paul, hace ya 4 años que nos encontramos aquí en la FIL, en 2017, cuando presentó 4, 3, 2, 1, esta extraordinaria novela sobre las distintas vidas de Ferguson. Y recuerdo muy bien la frase con la que terminó aquella presentación, cuando dijo que después de poner el punto final, se sintió tan exhausto que se resbaló con la rabadilla en la silla casi hasta caer al suelo. Yo en ese momento imaginé que el siguiente relato habría de ser algo así como Lola corre, o algún relato ligero de pocas páginas, ¿no? Quizás hasta un divertimento. Nunca me imaginé que el siguiente texto iba a tener más páginas que el anterior, más de 900 páginas, una biografía enorme de Stephen Crane. Y pues le pregunto, ¿cómo le hizo para levantarse de la silla y volver a escribir un tabique de este tamaño, Paul?
Well, it's true. I got up from the chair after I had finished the last sentence, and I was so tired. My legs were so weak. I didn't fall on the floor. I grabbed hold of the wall and kept myself upright. So I was not quite as exhausted as all that, but I was tired. And after I finished that long novel, I understood that I was not in any shape to write anything, and I needed to take time off. For the first time in my life, I needed a break from writing. And so I decided that I was going to indulge myself and spend a lot of time reading books that I had always meant to read and had never managed to find the time to do. I was going to watch a lot of films. I was going to watch as many baseball games as I wanted, and really just regroup and get my energy back. So I did read a number of extraordinary works of literature that I'm very grateful that I had the time. For example, I finally read, after all these years, To the Lighthouse by Virginia Woolf, which I have to say is one of the most beautiful, heartbreaking novels I've ever read in my life. It is an absolute masterpiece. And I read other things, many other things, among them, Stephen Crane. And I had read Crane when I was young. I had a book of Crane's work. It was a selection of about 500 pages of his different writings. And I looked through the contents, and there was a novella called The Monster, 60 pages or so. I had never heard of it, let alone ever read it. And I read The Monster, and I was awestruck by how brilliant it was and how powerful and how far ahead of its time it was in the subject it was taking on, which has to do with race in the United States, but also stylistically how modern it was. So, on the strength of reading this great little work, I started reading more Crane and more Crane and more Crane. And then when I had read everything in that book, I bought a bigger collection of Crane, 1,400 pages. I read everything. I was so excited. I said to myself, how is it possible that America produced this writer who died at the age of 28 in the year 1900, who did all this great work and nobody talks about it anymore? We know Stephen Crane for one thing and one thing only, a novel he published early in his career, The Red Badge of Courage, which is admittedly one of the greatest American novels ever written, and certainly the greatest war novel ever written. But there's so much more. And then I bought the collected writings of Stephen Crane in 10 volumes, 10 volumes, because in that short life, Crane produced over 3,100 pages of printed work, published printed work. And that includes poetry, short stories, novellas, novels, and journalism, and all kinds of journalism, including articles about New York City when he was living here, but also reports as a correspondent in 2 different wars. One of them, the most important, being the one in Cuba during the Spanish-American War. And I realized that I wanted to write something about Crane to show my appreciation for this work and to try to explain why people should start reading him again. And I really thought I would write a book of about 200 pages, a short appreciation. And once I started exploring his life and how interesting that was, I understood that, well, 200 pages maybe wasn't going to be enough, but I never thought it would turn out to be the 800-page book it is in English. I just never imagined that.
La lección es muy clara. Si Paul Auster está cansado, es que va a escribir un libro enorme. Voy a hacer un agradecimiento.
Eventually.
Eventually.
I have to say, Ricardo, I don't want to ever write another long book for the rest of my life.
Don't say that, please.
Short things.
I don't believe you.
I have to.
Tengo que agradecer tengo que agradecer a Planeta, desde luego, y a Sex Barral por esta oportunidad de presentar el libro hoy. Y al mismo tiempo hacer una breve reclamación que siempre se hace cuando se traduce un título de un libro. El libro se llama La llama inmortal de Stephen Crane, como se anunció. Pero el título en inglés refiere a algo más que a esta llama inmortal. Refiere al burning boy, o sea, el muchacho que no se consumía nunca, que no se apagaba nunca. Y a lo largo del relato, en efecto, vamos viendo a este joven escritor nervioso, diría yo hiperactivo, ¿no? Que nunca reía, pero hacía reír a todo el mundo, que buscaba la independencia desde cualquiera de sus formas, y que en ese sentido el título de Burning Boy parece que se ajusta con mucho mayor precisión. Pero se da cuenta también Crane, según este relato que hace Paul Auster, de una época que también está ardiendo, que también está en llamas, este transcurso del siglo XIX hacia el siglo XX. Y una de las cosas que lo tienen en llamas, por cierto, se parece mucho a las cuestiones que nos tienen en llamas hoy, Paul. Los polos, la polarización de nuestras sociedades. Siempre en esos polos cruzados el tema de clase. Y quien hace arte, quien relata, quien cronica, quien escribe, no puede apartarse de esas disyuntivas de su época. Y un elemento que para mí sí fue un gran descubrimiento, porque yo a Crane, tengo que decir, antes de usted no lo conocía, pero a Fitzgerald sí. Y Scott Fitzgerald aborda también este tema de la polarización, siempre, ¿no? Desde luego el Gran Gatsby, pero se le ha criticado siempre a Fitzgerald de observar esa polarización desde sus propios prejuicios de clase, visto desde arriba la polarización. Y tengo la sensación de haber descubierto en Crane exactamente el polo opuesto, el mismo fenómeno, la polarización social, pero vista sin prejuicios desde una prostituta de Maggie, ¿no? Desde los mexicanos, ahora hablaremos cuando hace el relato de esas 9 semanas en la Ciudad de México, desde la pobreza, desde la miseria. Y este es un aporte extraordinario, más poderoso, a veces tengo la sensación que Balzac, Solá y Dickens juntos unos años antes que el suyo. Me permito preguntarte en esta contradicción.
As I was writing the book, I understood that what the circumstances were in late 19th century America, the United States, it was very similar to what we're going through now, as you say. And the distance between the rich and the poor was enormous then, and it is, and afterwards, throughout the 20th century, there were improvements made in American society, with much struggle involved. Unions became a force in the country. Workers' pay became better. Back in the 1890s, workers were working 12 or 14 hours a day, 6 days a week, and they had no protections. And bit by bit, in the last 50 years, we've returned to those kinds of conditions where unions have been destroyed, the rich have become exceedingly rich, and most of the rest of us are poor or struggling or just barely above the poverty line. And this is supposed to be the wealthiest country in the world, but we have a good 40% of the population struggling from day to day. And it's a shocking realization. On top of all that, inside the United States, we have the ever-present problem of race, which has never fully been dealt with by the country. And Crane addressed all of this, even though he was not a political activist, but he was a person who watched carefully and he looked at what was going on without prejudice. As you say, unlike Fitzgerald, Crane had no preconceptions. He had the eye, in a way, of a journalist, saying, all right, what is happening and how can we best describe this without moralizing, without even making prescriptions about how to improve things. That was not his job. His job, as he said, again, was to tell the truth. And the truth, it can be very difficult to bear. And I think that's why his work is so radical. On top of that, stylistically, he was way ahead of everybody else. He had an eye for perceiving the real world that is so accurate, combined with a gift of metaphor and simile, and so that it makes it vivid, tangible. He had a great feeling for the surfaces of things, the effect of light on a piece of glass, for example. He could really write about this, or what water looked like under different skies. A remarkable, nuanced, painterly-like understanding of the perceived world. But he was a great psychologist as well, and he had a great ability to get inside the heads of his characters and track the wandering, random thoughts that fly through all of our heads at every minute of every day. And it's quite extraordinary. And I never got tired of reading this, and I never got tired of thinking about it.
Déjame, Polo, llamarlo una prosa sin velvet, sin cotton, sin algodones, sin cojines. El siglo XIX fue brutal en todo el mundo, pero si uno, ahora me veo obligado a hacer la comparación quizá con escritores franceses o ingleses, pero si uno lee la obra de Balzac o de Zola, ¿no?, de Dickens, en efecto no hay economía de palabras, ¿no? Es tan abundante la prosa que esas descripciones humanas envilecidas, dolientes, complicadas, se ven acompañados por un río que va humedeciendo las heridas. Y en el caso de Crane diera la impresión de que la economía de palabras lo muestra directo, sin estaciones. Decía yo hace un momento, brutal, pero al mismo tiempo pareciera que esto fue lo que hizo que su primera novela, Maggie, y buena parte de su obra no se conociera, porque ya lo decía usted, se adelantó al tiempo. En el siglo XX, ese estilo directo de escribir se convertiría en un estilo más común, ¿no? Más promedio entre los escritores, pero todavía el siglo XIX era impúdico, era mal visto describir a una prostituta como Maggie, ¿no? Y sus avatares cotidianos hasta la muerte.
Yes. Well, as I said at one point, I think it was while I was talking about Maggie in my book, I said, you know, the great 19th century masters like Dickens, Balzac, Tolstoy, you know, those are the big novels, and you can curl up on a sofa and relax and just fly through these wonderful stories. Whereas Crane, you have to read him sitting up in your chair, a hard chair. You cannot relax because every sentence is coming at you like a hammer. And you have to pay very close attention. And because what Crane did was he took all those conventions of the 19th century novel and he got rid of them. He stripped everything out. There is so much information that is not given in a Crane story or novel. It's remarkable. For example, the most famous book, The Red Badge of Courage, which is about the Civil War, the American Civil War. It's all seen through the eyes of a 16 or 17-year-old boy who has volunteered to fight in the Northern Army. Not once does Crane say, this is the Civil War. Not once does he mention slavery. Not once does he mention what people are fighting about. Not once does he mention the name Abraham Lincoln. There is no reference outside of the immediate action of the people involved in that action. And it has an incredible effect. It's a whole new way of thinking about how to tell a story set in the past, where we know the historical facts, and yet he just gets rid of them. For example, in Maggie, we don't know if Maggie's ever been to school. We don't know if Maggie can read or not. We don't know. He just doesn't bother to tell us because for him, it doesn't matter. I mean, what matters for him is how to tell things within the perceptual moments in which they're happening. And then the reader can understand much larger implications by these moments. So it's a new narrative style, and I think it was the opening of the door into the 20th century. And without Crane, I don't think there is Hemingway or any of the other great American writers of the 20th century.
Hablando de Hemingway, no deja de llamar la atención que haya nacido solamente un año antes de la muerte de Crane. Entonces, estas coincidencias cósmicas que siempre son llamativas. George Wyndham, que es un crítico inglés de la época, lo cita.
And Crane knew Hemingway's mother in New York. Now that's really strange.
Nueva York, siempre Nueva York. George Wyndham, decía yo hace un momento, es un crítico inglés que lee la roja insignia del valor y escribe la siguiente frase: es un texto comparado a la guerra y la paz de Tolstoy. O sea, no es una comparación menor. Paul Auster ha comparado con Mozart, con Shelley como poeta. Es decir, sí estamos hablando de un personaje extrañamente extraviado de nuestra vida y nuestro conocimiento de la literatura occidental. Y esta misión de Paul Auster de rescatarlo no deja de ser de lo más interesante, de lo más loable. Y aquí vienen algunos argumentos que siempre se antoja hacer al autor del libro, a Paul Auster, y es por qué ciertos rasgos de Crane le llamaron más la atención que otros. Y voy a centrarme en dos. El primero es estas batallas que libra consigo mismo. Parecen muchísimo más importantes las batallas psicológicas que las sociológicas o las globales. como si esa fuera la verdadera batalla. Y la segunda, el tema del miedo, que está en Roja, insignia del valor, pero está en el resto de sus obras. Es decir, el miedo como un motor, el miedo como un objeto de exploración. El miedo y las batallas contra uno mismo, que quizás son sinónimos. ¿Por qué son temas que brincaron en esta reflexión o en esta lectura que hizo de Crane desde que empezó a escribir el libro?
Well, I think when you think about Crane, the most important work he did is all about extreme situations. Whether we're talking about war or the desperate violence of impoverished neighborhoods, the lower classes. And I think a lot of this had to do with the fact that his background, it's important to mention that his father was a Protestant minister, a Methodist. His mother, too, was a very ardent Methodist. And it's a very harsh religion. It's the kind of religion where they don't want people to dance. I mean, dancing was forbidden. It was a religion in which the original sin of mankind was stamped on them, and they had to somehow repent in order, to get to heaven, because we are all such terrible, terrible sinners. Crane broke away from all that. He rejected that religion, but it nevertheless, I think, gave him the sense that only big things matter. I'm not going to be a writer about social manners. This is not what interests me. I'm interested in the eternal struggles of death and life, and what is a soul, what is a human being. And then there's the fact that I think Crane understood early on, in spite of the fact that he was a very good athlete and he played many sports and was strong. He was small but strong. He also had lung problems, and I think it's quite possible that when he was a boy, he had an early case of tuberculosis that he recovered from. But he was weak. There was something in him, I think he felt, that was going to kill him. And I think he knew that he wasn't going to have a long life. And therefore, I think he wanted to cram as much as he could into the few years he felt that he had in front of him, which inspired him in ways that are quite extraordinary to take a lot of risks, more risks than most people are willing to take. He had a passion for gambling. He loved to play poker. And it wasn't so much that he was a very good poker player either. And it wasn't about the money. It was about not knowing. It was about the fact that, well, it can turn out this way if I turn over that card, or that way if I turn out that card. So the whole great maelstrom, the philosophical maelstrom of chance, also plays a big part in how we thought about the world. So it's just utterly fascinating to me. And that's why, as I say, I was excited writing the book. I never got bored, and I never thought I was wasting my time. I would sometimes say, why am I doing this? Why am I writing a book like this? I've never done this before. And
hace unos meses recibí una llamada de mi editorial diciéndome que un libro ya de algunos años publicado por mi pluma iba a ser descatalogado. Se siente complicado soportar eso, pero tiene lógica. Después de 10 años la mayoría de los libros son descatalogados. En el caso de Crane, la roja insignia del valor, lo dice Paul Auster con mucha claridad, no ha salido del catálogo desde 1895. Paul, un hombre de una vida tan corta, con un libro que ha tenido una vida tan larga. ¿Por qué la roja insignia del valor? Entre muchos otros relatos de la guerra civil en Estados Unidos, ha logrado sobrevivir y ser leído todavía hoy por los estudiantes de high school?
Well, it's not being read by high school students. This is part of the problem. But in America, the Red Badge of Courage has never been out of print. It's always been in circulation ever since it was published in 1895, which is one of the few books one can say that it has never left us. It's there. There must be 10 different paperback editions of the Red Badge of Courage in the United States. High school students are not reading it, but anyone in a university studying American literature will read that book and maybe some other things by Crane. But what upsets me is that, yes, okay, students, professors, specialists still read Crane, but I'm interested in the general readers, people who, for example, continue to read Herman Melville or Thoreau or even Hawthorne. They're not reading Crane anymore, and I would like this to change.
Paul, tu otra fórmula para aproximarte a la realidad ha sido el cine. Y no te ahorras el placer que te entrega leer a Crane, algunos de sus relatos, como si estuvieses leyendo un filme, una película. Relatas los cortes, cómo resuelve la caída de un perro sin tener que aclarar que murió el perro, cómo pasa de una imagen a otra, de un tiempo a otro, cinematográficamente. Al leerlo me preguntaba si ese era Paul Auster o Stephen Crane. Es decir, si era tu mirada sobre el relato de Crane o realmente Crane se adelantó a la escritura de los guiones modernos.
I believe it's not me, it's him. It's in the work. He is anticipating film. The kinds of jumps he makes in his stories are very similar to the way you edit a film. And it's very interesting to me is that when he finished another book, the one after the Red Badge of Courage, it's a book that no one reads anymore. It's called The Third Violet. It's mostly a novel written in dialogue. And to me, I called it the first screenplay ever written. It's this novel as a screenplay. And he finished that book on the last days of December 1895. The same week, this is what so interests me, the same week that the Lumiere brothers in Paris projected on a large screen a film for a paying audience of 700 people in a theater in Paris for the first time in human history. That was when movies began. And it was exactly at that moment that Crane finished his most cinematic novel. And there was something in the air, something new. And other people had said it, friends of his who outlived him, and were writing about him in the 1920s and 30s. They said Crane and his cinema imagination. And he saw things in images in the way that a filmmaker would.
Es un personaje que al hablar de él está sin duda hablando de una época y que conoció muchos otros personajes de época. Decías hace un momento ya bien que conoció a la madre Hemingway, tuvo relación en su cortísima vida con H.G. Wells, y uno de los encuentros más extraños con los que yo me topo es que fue conocido y admirado por quien iba a ser presidente de Estados Unidos, por el primer Roosevelt. Y que era además jefe de policía. Yo no sabía que Roosevelt había sido jefe de policía en Nueva York y lo admiraba, pero esta historia que cuentas de Crane, de que es capaz de pelearse con el jefe de policía con tal de defender la verdad de una prostituta que era desecho humano en la época, es decir, esa amistad con la verdad, otra vez, quizá muy metodista, me impresionó. Tuvo que dejar incluso su país, irse a Cuba después de ese desencuentro. ¿Podrías contarle al auditorio justamente de este episodio entre Crane y Roosevelt?
Well, yes, Roosevelt wasn't president yet. He became president after Crane died, the year after Crane died, when he had been made vice president, and William McKinley, the president, was assassinated, and Roosevelt became president in 1901. But the fact is, when Roosevelt was only 36 years old, he was appointed the police commissioner of New York City. Roosevelt was from New York City. He was a New Yorker. He had grown up here, and he had been involved in politics from the beginning. But Roosevelt was also a great reader of books, and there are accounts of him reading. He read 2 or 3 books every day. Every day, Roosevelt read 2 or 3 books.
Y perdona, ¿que ahora se podía hacer cargo de los asuntos de seguridad de Nueva York y leer 3 libros? ¿O era tan aburrida Nueva York entonces?
Well, I think he just had the time, and he read very quickly. He read in the morning before breakfast, and then at night. He wrote 40 books. He wrote hundreds, if not thousands, of articles, and he wrote 150,000 letters, Teddy Roosevelt. So he was a man who cared about writing, and he read Crane, and he was a great admirer of Crane's early work. But he did become police commissioner, and Crane got into a situation. He was writing a series of articles about a kind of, a so-called bad neighborhood in New York City called the Tenderloin, where there were a lot of prostitutes and gambling places and all the sinful activities that go on in big cities. And one night he was interviewing 2 girls who worked in a show. They were chorus girls, and a prostitute friend of one of them came up and sat down and talked to them. And then it was time to leave. It was 2 o'clock in the morning, and Crane walked out with the 3 women. And he put one of them on a cable car to send her home. And while he was walking back, while the other 2 women were talking, a man, a plainclothes policeman, jumped out of the shadows and arrested the 2 women for solicitation, which they hadn't been doing. Crane had seen it with his own eyes, and he thought, this is terrible. They put the one known prostitute in prison, and he said, this is unfair, and he stood up for her, and he got her out of the jail the next day at a little hearing. But then the prostitute was so angry that she sued the detective for false arrest, and there was a trial. And that was when the police they went after Crane. When he wasn't home, they raided his apartment. They found out all kinds of things about his private life. And when he finally got on the stand, they destroyed him. And he was forced to leave New York because the police never left him alone. So what does he do? He leaves New York. He gets a job with a news syndicate to go to Cuba to start covering the revolution against the Spanish. He has to go to Florida to get the ship to take him to Cuba. He waits a month in Florida. He falls in love with the woman he will live the rest of his life with in Florida. He gets on the boat on New Year's Eve, 1896-7, and the boat sinks. And out of the 20 people on the boat, 7 drowned. They were killed. Crane wound up in a little rowboat with the captain and 2 other crew members, and they couldn't get to shore. It took 30 hours out there on the open sea, finally to be rescued. One of them was killed, and that became the source of one of Crane's greatest stories called The Open Boat, which is another masterpiece. So things just kept happening to this boy. You know, he was never outside of some kind of trouble of one kind or another.
Ahora, los botes salvavidas, open boats, lo ayudaron a salir de muchas circunstancias. Y yo creo que un gran bote salvavidas fue el periodismo. Varias veces él recurre al periodismo para ganarse unos dólares, unas libras. Y está este episodio que presentando el libro hoy aquí en la FIL de Guadalajara, no puedo ahorrarte, y es su viaje por México, ¿no? Financiado por la agencia de noticias Bachelor, cuando va desde Nebraska hasta la Ciudad de México, pasando por San Antonio. De San Antonio a la Ciudad de México se hacían 72 horas entre 1,500 kilómetros. Ahí mencionas que la comida mexicana no le gustaba. No se deba contarle esto a la gente, pero vale la pena. Le parecía que los tamales y el resto de la comida mexicana sabía como los ladrillos del horno del infierno. Parece que eso no fue lo que más le gustó. Bueno, era comida en San Antonio. Pero cuando llega a la Ciudad de México hay una necesidad de comprender, dices tú, pero al mismo tiempo necesidad de transmitir. Y algo aprende de esta suerte de resignación de la pobreza que él cree observar. Encuentra en las clases bajas mexicanas, incluso escribe un texto que así se llama, The Mexican Lower Classes, la sensación de que hay cosas terribles en la vida material de estas personas, pero que al final de cuentas viven en paz con esa circunstancia. Y luego tú mismo mencionas, no podía medir que 15 años después, Emiliano Zapata y la Revolución Mexicana iban a estallar. No alcanzó a percibirlo. Claro, en ese entonces quizá todavía no era posible percibirlo en México. Ese viaje y ese encuentro con México, con el Popocatépetl, con el Iztaccíhuatl, que pues más de un estadounidense ha tenido como encuentro y desencuentro con México. Paul, ¿qué nos puedes contar de este episodio?
Well, I think it was a very crucial moment in his life. I think the thing about the food, you have to understand that Crane also, on top of everything else, had a very wonderful sense of humor, and he joked a lot. And in these articles, I don't think he took these articles very seriously. He wrote them quickly, and he was trying to be amusing, you know, to write for an audience in America. So I wouldn't take any of that too seriously.
So he's forgiven, don't worry.
He's forgiven on that. I think so. These travel articles, you know, it was wonderful for him as a release from his poverty. He had an expense account. It was the first time as a young writer that he was free. And also, it was at that point that his novel, The Red Badge of Courage, was accepted for publication in the United States. He was feeling good. He was happy, and he wrote a lot of very whimsical pieces. But that one piece, The Mexican Lower Classes, was never published. And I don't know why. No one knows why. And it didn't actually get published until 1967. It was right in the middle of the Vietnam War that we finally read Crane's little essay. It's only 4 pages long, but it is a very deep exploration about what are the limits of complaint against a society? What you know is the measuring stick in which you can say, I refuse, I want to rebel. And what his conclusion is that equal opportunity, if you don't have equal opportunities in a society, then you have an excuse for saying no and for resisting the powers in control. It's a rather confused piece of writing. It covers many things. He's comparing the poor of New York City, you know, to the poor of Mexico. He's talking about the anger he sees in the Americans. He's looking at their faces, the lines in their faces, which seem to him to represent a kind of vehement hostility, whereas when he looks at the Mexican peasants, poor as they were, he sees a kind of tranquility in their faces. He's very impressed by this. And he thinks that, contrary to what people might think, these are superior people. They have somehow transcended their material conditions to attain some kind of inner harmony with the world. Now, I know this is not strictly true, but it's interesting that this is how he perceived it. And no, of course he couldn't have predicted the revolution that was going to come. But I don't think anybody else did either in 1900, especially an American tourist in Mexico wouldn't have known the details.
Me veo obligado aquí a introducir una pregunta muy rápida. Me hiciste notar su background metodista, pero es que en realidad en Crane no se nota ese background metodista, y para alguien que está lejos del metodismo es difícil hacer esta lectura que acabas de hacer. Pero lo que más me sorprende es que no haya nunca un contraste entre esa creencia religiosa y el catolicismo que podría explicar esta suerte de paz y de resignación que él observa. No deja jugar el argumento religioso en sus prejuicios o en sus juicios. ¿Tienes alguna idea por qué?
No, I don't think he understood anything about Catholicism. I just don't think he probably he hadn't quite absorbed it. Listen, at the point that he was writing that article, he was 23 years old, and he was still learning the world. He had never been outside of the United States. Everything was very new and dazzling and confusing to him, and he was doing his best to try to understand what he was seeing.
Yeah.
I just think what's moving about that little essay is how sincere it is, how heartfelt, and it's such an honest struggle to try to come to grips with how one, because he says early in the piece, and I think it's maybe the best thing he said, there's no literature more stupid in the entire world than when a person from one country tries to write about the people of another country. All that work is useless. And so he's almost saying everything I'm going to say in this article is open to doubt. I have no real answers. I'm just giving you my reflections on what I'm seeing, but this is not a definitive account.
Estamos hablando también de Paul Auster, pero tendrías que concederme que si creyeras en alguna religión que a su vez cree en la reencarnación, podríamos decir que Stephen Crane estaba en su última reencarnación. Había una suerte de sabiduría muy temprana que tú rescatas, pero que está desde luego en su obra. Y déjame, a propósito de esto, traer un tema más. Una reflexión que es tuya, pero está en la época, y que fijas muy bien en una frase del texto que me pareció sorprendente. Dices, la naturaleza no piensa en absoluto, y las fuerzas que reinan en el cielo y en la tierra les resultan indiferentes las minúsculas penas de los hombres. Es decir, la naturaleza no se interesa en eso que los seres humanos consideramos el bien o el mal, el dolor o la felicidad. Por cierto, este es un tema muy próximo a Steinbeck también, muy, muy próximo. La idea de que el mar, ¿no? De la Segunda Guerra puede arrollar con la vida de las pequeñas partículas que somos los seres humanos. Esta es una frase, Paul, que a la luz, perdón que te traiga ahora al tema presente, de la pandemia del coronavirus, es durísima. El coronavirus, la naturaleza, estas pandemias nos demuestran cuán pequeños somos y que frente a esa pequeñez quizá la resignación es un rasgo de sabiduría.
Well, I think this is one of Crane's essential truths, the discoveries of Crane, is that how little human beings are and how unimportant we are. It doesn't mean, he doesn't mean to say that we're unimportant to one another. No, what human beings do matters, but not in the big cosmic picture. It only matters in the human world. And I believe that as his thinking evolved, even though it was also compressed in just a few years. He came to a position in the last 2 or 3 years of his life that I would say was an anticipation of existentialism. There's something very similar about Crane's outlook on the universe to Albert Camus. Camus and Crane are very similar in that, all right, we're living in an absurd world. The gods have vanished. Everything is thrown back on us. And however unimportant we are in the cosmic scheme, we have an obligation, to take care of one another, to live together, and in the best possible way. So therefore, moral actions are important, and I think it's a great and early post-religious stance about how to live a moral life, and I think that's his great contribution in the end, in terms of what the essence of his work is about. Forgetting all the greatness of the writing and all of that. That is the core message in Crane. We are little, and yet we have an obligation to one another.
Pues se dice hasta el cansancio que Crane vive a caballo entre dos siglos. A ti y a mí y a nuestra generación ya nos tocó ese episodio. Y sabemos que el fin de un siglo y el comienzo de otro despierta más expectativas, más esperanzas y más capacidad de imaginar una mejor humanidad. ¿Fue Crane víctima de esta ilusión? ¿Fue no solamente un adelantado, como dice, sino alguien capaz de imaginar que el siglo XX podía ser mejor? ¿O esta tortura de la tuberculosis, de la enfermedad, de la tragedia, no le permitió imaginar con esperanza el siglo XX?
I don't think he thought about progress. I don't think he actually believed in progress. I think he thought that, life was an eternal battle. And, whether it's a class war or a war of human beings against nature or circumstances. And I think he didn't have big schemes about the improvement of the world. He left that to his parents and all those people who believed in that kind of God, that Methodist God, the Protestant God. He really wanted nothing to do with that after a while. And I think these religious torments are most clear in his poetry. Crane's poetry, which we haven't talked about, is extraordinary. It's not like any other poetry I've ever read. And it's simple, spare, and bizarre. I quote one of the poems in the early, they're all short. And here, I'll recite one of the poems because I find it so terrific. In the desert, I saw a creature, naked, bestial, who, squatting upon the ground, held his heart in his hands and ate of it. I said, "Is it good, friend?" He said, "It is bitter, bitter, but I like it because it is bitter and because it is my heart." That's it. What an amazing...
¿Me dejas devolverte otra? Un hombre temía encontrarse con un asesino, otro encontrarse con una víctima. Uno era más sabio que el otro. Qué ganas de preguntarle cuál de los dos, Paul.
Which one? That's for you.
Which one are you? Which one are
you? But it's astonishing poetry. But in those poems, there's a lot of anger against the God of his parents and explicit references to religion that are not really in the prose works. The only time in Maggie, when she is sinking to the bottom, but she hasn't yet become a prostitute. She's walking along the street feeling lost, and there comes a minister, you know, a man of God, and he sees her and he steps away. He ignores her, and that's a kind of stinging rebuke from Crane against the hypocrisies of religion, and it's a powerful moment in the book.
Pues me queda lamentablemente una última pregunta, porque me encantaría seguir con esta conversación. Y déjame hacer la pregunta a propósito de esta dicotomía entre la fama y la ignominia. Crane vivió la fama, ¿no? La novela que lo hizo famoso, La roja, insignia del valor, le entregó fama. Y tampoco le gustó la fama. No le gustó la ignominia, pero tampoco la fama.
No.
Y al final, después de tantos años, ha ganado la ignominia, ha ganado la ignorancia de la mayoría sobre su existencia y su obra. Y te quiero preguntar si es posible, con un trabajo tan monumental como este que has hecho, y también a partir de una voz tan potente en nuestra época como la tuya, rescatar de entre las aguas frente a Cuba, o entre la tumba aquella en Alemania, o los silencios que se han hecho alrededor de la obra de Crane, una obra tan importante, una literatura tan importante. Si tú crees que es posible rescatar a alguien que se perdió en el tiempo, o simplemente era una deuda que tú tenías con esta historia, con este personaje, con la literatura estadounidense.
Well, listen, it is certainly possible to bring back artists who have been forgotten. I can think of two very famous examples. Johann Sebastian Bach, for 150 years, no one remembered him at all. He was gone. And then the great Dutch painter Vermeer, for 300 years, no one was paying attention to Vermeer. Now we acknowledge both of them as among the greatest artists that the Western world has ever produced. But I don't know if my book on Crane will resurrect him or not. I hope so. That was one of the driving reasons why I decided to write the book. But it's too early to know. I don't know if I'll succeed or fail. I don't know. I hope I succeed, but you know, life doesn't always work out the way you hope it will. So I don't know what to tell you. Is anyone going to be interested? I don't even know if anyone will be interested in reading this. Who knows? I just can't say.
Fue inevitable cuando me llegó el libro suponer que era una novela tuya. Y tengo que decirte que en un principio, cuando me di cuenta que era una biografía, empecé a trastabillar, a tropezarme un poco, sobre todo por mi ignorancia sobre quién es Stephen Crane. Lo que me toca decir es que después de haberte seguido por estas más de 900 páginas, es una historia formidable. No importa si el formato es biografía, es novela, es relato, es extraordinario. Acaba uno con un enorme interés de leer a este jovencísimo Stephen Crane, que coincidiendo con tu percepción habría marcado la literatura que vino después de él. Muchísimas gracias, Paul Auster, por este texto, por acompañarnos aquí en la FIL de Guadalajara, y pues hasta la próxima visita al Popocatépetl y al Ixtla, que te hace bien venir acá, por lo menos nos hace mucho bien a nosotros.
Thank you. I just enjoy being in Mexico, even if I'm not there physically right now. I have a wonderful, I don't know, sympathy with the place. And I just want to thank you for inviting me. And I enjoyed it thoroughly talking to you and all your very good questions. So thank you. And hello, Guadalajara.
Hasta el próximo libro, Paul. Muchísimas gracias.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you.